Hello, my name is Medhat Elmasry. Today we're going to cover ASP.NET Core 3.0 Web API. Let's get started. What we're trying to model today is this. We're going to create three entities. The first entity we'll create is a medication entity. And the second one is an ailment entity. And the third is a patient entity. So there will be one-to-many relationships between the patient and between the ailment. One patient can take multiple medications, or one patient can have multiple ailments. Okay, so this is what we're trying to model, and we're going to build a web API that supports this model. I'm going to create a directory called health. Let's go into the health folder, and in there we're going to create two directories. A health API folder and another one called the cores client folder. So under health we've got two directories. One is health API, the other one is cores client. Let's go into the health API folder, and in here we're going to create a web API application. So we would go .NET new, and the template for web API is simply web API. Now we can run this web API app by typing in .NET watch run. Now bear in mind that because we're working with APIs here, APIs are not visual. You're not going to see a neat looking web page that uses CSS and all that stuff. This is totally data that's going to be exposed here. And the type of data that's going to be exposed, it is JSON objects. So let's go into this website and try to see what there is. So when you get to this website, it doesn't find anything. It doesn't find anything because there is no home page. There are just APIs. To find out what endpoint we should be looking at, we need to get into the application itself. So let me go into the application in Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to right click on this and going to open with code. And you will see that we have one controller, and this controller is called the weather forecast controller. And you can see from the annotation here that it is an API controller, and it's got a route. Normally with APIs, the route that is traditionally used is API/controller, but that's not what they created for us here, which means that in order to get at this controller, we have to go to this endpoint, weather forecast. So I'm going to tag weather forecast to the URL, and then we get something. So this is the only output that our application is capable of providing. Let us look into the controller to understand what is the controller doing here. So if we look at the controller, you'll see that there is at the very top here a static string array named summaries, and it's got descriptive types of weather. This is the constructor, and the constructor has the logger object that is injected as dependency injection here. So it sets an instance variable called _logger, but at this point in time it's not being used at all in the application. It's a good idea to have this logger if you want to log any activities that could be happening in your application. Let's look more at the get method. The get method returns a collection of weather forecast objects. So at first it is generating a random number, and it is creating 5 different items. For each item it's instantiating a weather forecast object. So let's go and look at this weather forecast object down here. The weather forecast object is composed of a date, a temperature in centigrade, and then there's a temperature in Fahrenheit that is immediately a conversion of your centigrade temperature. And finally, you got some summary. So that's our weather forecast object. So going back to our controller, for every item in this collection, it is creating a weather forecast object by adding the number of days depending on the index, and it's creating a random temperature in centigrade between -22 and 55, and it's just randomly selecting a summary from this static string array. So this is where this stuff is coming from. Now, we need to find out more about how you can create your own web API. So let's do our own web API and let it eventually be one that is database driven based on the model that I explained earlier. At first, we're going to create a web API that doesn't necessarily use a model. And to do that, I'm going to stop the server and we're going to install a bunch of tools and packages. So two of the tools that we'll be needing today are this .NET EF tool and the .NET code generator over here. So if you haven't installed that already, you need to install this by following these two commands and run them anywhere in your file system in a terminal window. It doesn't matter which location you're at. The second thing is, inside of your project, you need to install all of these packages. And these packages, most of them are to do with Entity Framework, which is the object relational model that we're going to be using here. And there's one that has to do with code generation. So I'm going to copy all of these and execute them in the folder of my web API application. I want to scaffold a very simple web API controller that's not based on any model. And the command for doing that is this, .NET, and we're going to use this utility called the aspnet-codegenerator. We want to scaffold a controller. We want to give it the name values controller. It's going to use the async model, and of course this switch -API indicates that we wanted to indeed create an API controller. This is the type of API controller that we wanted to create, and this means it's going to be a very simple web API controller that doesn't really depend on a model, and we want the output directory to be the controllers folder. So let's take this command and execute it here. At this point, it has created for us our values controller. Let's go into Visual Studio Code and see what it's done. But before we do that, let's start our application. And then we can go into Visual Studio Code and have a peek at the new controller that we have. And here it is. We have here a values controller. Let's see what it does. You will see now that the route that was created for this is API/controller. Let us request that endpoint. So we can go in here and type in API values. And this is what you get. This is the endpoint, and this is what's being returned. So we're not really getting a JSON object. We're just getting an array of strings. Let's see the code. You can see that this is the output coming from this action method. Now this action method, it has an HTTP GET attribute, which means that when a request is coming for this service using the GET verb, it would end up here. The name of this method doesn't really matter. So I can change this get to get something, for example. And if I refresh my page, it's going to end up getting the same thing. So it doesn't have to be a name that starts with get. I might even change the word get to fetch something. If I go back up here and refresh, it will still work, because what matters is this verb, the HTTP get attribute. The name doesn't matter. Okay, let's look at this method here. And this method is also get, but the route expects an ID, which means that if I want to get into this action method, I need to type some sort of a number following, and you will see that it ends up there. But this is not very interesting. Let's do something that's more interesting. So I'm going to come here and create a string array of something that makes more sense. So I'm going to add this array of days. And if I wanted to display all the days in this action method, I can just get it to return days. And if I refresh but remove the ID, I should get my days. What about if I add a number here? If I add a number, I'll just get value because I haven't changed the second action method. For me to have some meaningful results in the second action method, I'll replace this code with something else. So what I'm saying here is, if the ID is greater than -1 and less than the size of my days array, then I'm going to return the index of that item in the days array. Otherwise, I'm going to return a blank. Let's see if this is going to work. So if I come here and I choose, say, index 2, it's going to return me Wednesday. If I request index 22, it will return for me a blank. So that's working. So now we know how to create our own controller. The other action methods here do not do anything. These are just placeholders. We should bear in mind that the HTTP post attribute represents an insert. The HTTP put attribute represents an update, and the HTTP delete attribute represents a delete. So when we are carrying out CRUD operations, they actually matter. The right verb does the appropriate action. Let's switch gears and start working with a database. So I'm going to start a SQL Server container. This command is going to start a Docker container based on SQL Server, and there are some environment variables here. Accept EULA equals to yes, and SA password is SQL Express exclamation mark, and another environment variable is MS SQL PID equals to express. So let's just run this, and it's going to create for us a container. And to see that the container is running, we can type in docker ps, and we'll see that it's been running for 5 seconds. So now we have a database that we can use to work against. The next thing we want to do is go into our app settings here and add a connection string to our database. So this is what our connection string is going to look like. We're going to connect to localhost, and we're going to use port 1444 because the SQL Server that's in the container externally listens on port 1444. And I'm going to call my database the Health API database. The username is going to be SA, which is the admin username, and I actually set this password. So now we have a connection string. Let's create our models. So in our application, I'm going to create 2 folders. One folder is going to be called models, and another folder is going to be called data. Now inside of my models folder, I'm going to add 3 classes. One class is going to be called ailment, and the other class is going to be called medication. And the third class is going to be patient. So for ailment, the code is going to look like this. Let me resolve this. So for ailment, I just have the name of the ailment, nothing else. For medication, the code is going to look like this. I have two properties, the name and the doses. For patient, the code is going to look like this. Now, the patient has an ID, and this is an auto-generated primary key. The patient has a name and has a collection of ailments. A patient can have multiple ailments, and a patient can take multiple medications. Now, when we're doing code-first development or any entity framework, we need to create a context class. So under my data folder, I'm going to create a new class that I shall call the health context. And this is what my health context is going to look like. Let me resolve some of these. So, my health context has a constructor that passes on the options over to the base class. And there's an onModel creating method here, but before we talk about the onModel creating method, let's look at what we have here. What we have here is the fact that we're going to generate these artifacts in the database. The first artifact is a collection of ailment DB set objects, which we shall call ailments. And the other one is a DB set of medication, which we shall call medication. And the third is for patients. Over here in the onModel creating method, this is called while the model is being created in the database. We're saying that the name property for ailment, medication, and patient, we want that to be 40 characters long max. We want the table for ailment in the database to be named ailment singular. Same for medication, we want that to be medication singular, and patient, we want that to be patient singular. The next step is to add some code in my startup.cs to link the name of my connection string with the name of my context class, and also to make that context class a singleton. So let's go into the startup.cs and over to my configure services method, and I'll add some code in here. And this says that the connection string default connection will be used for this context class, and we're going to be using SQL Server here. It is customary to create some sample data for development purposes. So I'm going to come under my data folder and create a new class here that I shall call dummy data. In my dummy data class, I shall generate some sample data. Let us resolve these namespaces here. So at the very top of this dummy data class, I have a method called initialize. And what this initialize method does is it checks whether I have any ailments, and if there are no ailments in the database, then it's going to add some sample data. So it's going to call methods that I have here. Down here I have a method called getAilments that produces 4 ailments, and I have another one called getMedication that produces 5 medications, and the same for patients, where I have down here some patients. And remember that each patient can have multiple ailments. So here I'm adding 2 ailments to the first patient, Jim Jones, 1 ailment to Anne, and over here I'm adding 2 ailments to Tom, plus some medications. Going back to the initialize method, so the initialize method is going to actually generate these items of data and save them to the context, as you can see here. And this is a static method. We need to call that static method from the startup class. But before we do that, now that we have our models, we have our context class, we're in good shape to actually generate some migrations. Let's go to the command prompt here and execute some migrations so that we can have the Fluid API that generates the artifacts in the database. So the first migration command that I want to do is dotnet-ef, and if you install the utility I recommended at the very beginning, then you will have this. So it's dotnet-ef migrations add, and M1 is nothing but the name I'm giving this migration, and I want the output to go into the data migrations folder. So if I hit enter here, it should create for me those Fluid API commands. And that seems to have been done. Let's go back in here and check the migrations folder under data. And sure enough, now we can see that there is a file by a date stamp and M1, which is the name we gave our migration. And you can see here that the create table commands and the create primary key commands and all that stuff has been generated for us over here. We don't need to do anything with this file, so I'm going to close it. Now the next thing is we can update the database. To update the database, we can execute this command, .NET-EF database update, and this should actually create for us the tables and all the artifacts in the database. Now the fact that we did not get any errors, and if you look at all these commands here, it means that our database has been created with all the tables and all the indexes. All that stuff has been done for us. We created some dummy data, so let's see if we can execute that dummy data. We need to call this method, initialize method, from somewhere in our application. So I'm going to do that from the startup. In the configure method here, I'm going to execute that initialize method and pass it an app object, because if you go back to my dummy data, the initialize method takes an app object. So I'm going to come down here and go dummy data dot initialize, and I'll pass it the app object. Now we can run our application and find out if this produces some data. Let's start our application. When you start your application, you'll see a bunch of SQL commands that are being executed, and this indicates that the data is being generated. Now let's find out if we can see our data. So I'm going to use a utility that you can freely download called Azure Data Studio. So in Azure Data Studio, I've set up a connection that connects to my database. And the connection uses localhost at listening on 1444 with the username being SA and the password that was in my connection screen. You can see here that I do have a database called Health API. Let's see what data there is in there. First of all, we know that there are 3 tables. Now that 4th table helps Entity Framework determine if there's any changes that have been made to the model. I'm going to look at my patient table and see what's in it. And you can see here that I have my 3 patients. So this is working. We have our data in the database and things look good. I'm going to close this app. The next step is to scaffold a controller. So I shall close my application and scaffold a controller for patients. You can also scaffold a controller for ailments and for medication. I want to keep it simple and just focus on one of the models. So this is the command for scaffolding a controller for patients. We're going to use again this utility, and we're going to ask for a controller, the name of which is going to be patients controller. We want async requests to the database, and we want an API controller here. The model that we're going to be using is the patient model. The database context class is going to be health context, and the output directory will be controllers. So let's copy this and paste it in our terminal window. Now we have our patient's controller. Let's start our application and see if we can see the data. By the way, what we can do is come into this startup.cs file. We can really comment out this method because it's done its job. We have some dummy data. We don't need it anymore. Now that our application has started, let's go to the endpoint and see if we can see some patient's data. So I can come back here, and instead of values, I'm going to type in patients. And there we go. We can see our patients. Now you will notice that the medications are null and the ailments are none. The reason for that is, by default, Entity Framework uses what we call lazy loading. When you request a table, it doesn't bring all the related data associated with that table. The opposite of that is called eager loading. And if you want associated data to be also loaded, then you have to tell Entity Framework of your intention. Let's go into the controller for patients, which is over here. And first, let's have a look at it. So this controller is using the health context that is being injected with dependency injection inside of the constructor. That makes it available to the rest of our class. This is the method that we were using just now when we made a GET request to the patient's controller. It returns for us all the patients. In addition to that, there's another action method here that returns a patient by ID. And we have a bunch of other methods. This is the put method, and you can see the verb here, put. Put requires an ID to be passed, and essentially this method does an update. There is another method down here called the post. There's another method down here, the post patient method, that responds to post, and it does an insert. Finally, at the bottom here, we have a delete method that deletes a patient, and it also requires that you pass the ID. Down here, there's a helper method that is used by the rest of the controller. We said we want to see the related data for patients, and that we can do by adding some include lines here. So I can come in here and say include, and maybe ailments, and also I'll ask it to include the medication. This should solve our problem. Let us refresh and see what happens. So now if I come here and I refresh, we're getting the ailments and we're getting the medications. What about if we want to just access data for one of the patients? So I'm going to go /1, and I'm able to get the data for Tom Myers. But again, unfortunately, the ailments are null and the medications are null. Back in our controller, we need to do something over here. Let's replace this line of code with an improved line of code that retrieves for us all the data that's related to this one patient. I shall replace this line of code with this. And you can see here that I'm also saying include the ailments, include the medications for patient ID equals to the ID that's being passed. Let's refresh and find out if this works. And sure enough, that works. There are circumstances when you need to go above and beyond the get methods or the post methods that are given to you by the scaffolder. If you have some proprietary requests from your users that they need an action method that does something really, really special, you can always customize your API controller to do that. For example, suppose I want to come here and say, I want only the medication for this particular user. So I might want to create an endpoint that looks like this. And I want the results simply to be, in the case of Tom Myers, I just want the medication, which is Robaxin and Tylenol. That's all I'm interested in. You can do that. You can add a custom action method. For example, I'm going to add this action method here. And what this action method does is it first dictates what my routing is going to look like. Just like I said over here, I want my routing to look like this. I want it to have API patients, an ID, followed by the word medication. So that's exactly what I'm dictating down here. I'm saying I want an ID followed by medication. So this action method is going to take an ID. I'm going to go and get all the patients that match this ID, and notice what's happening here. I shall return only the medications that belong to that patient, nothing else. So let's refresh and see what this is going to do. And this is exactly what I get. So you can create whatever action methods you want to serve whatever purpose you want. We're pretty much done with our API. Let's see how we can consume it. And if you remember, when we first started this, I created two folders. If I show you my directories, under health, I've got the course client and I've got the health API client. I think I'm done with my health API client. Let me see if I can consume it. So let's go to this course client and create another app here. I'm going to create an empty web application. To do that, I'm going to do .NET new web. If you look at the templates here, you'll see that one of the templates that we have is web. And what does web do? It creates an empty ASP.NET Core app. So let's do that. We'll request a new web app. If we run this, we will see that it's just returning a hello world. It just says hello world. We're going to have two applications that are running. One is the server, one is the client. You can't have both running on port 5001 because there will be a conflict. So I'm going to change the port number for my client app so that it is 6000 and 6001. To do that, let's stop this here. Instead of opening up two instances of Visual Studio Code, one for the server, one for the client, which can get really confusing, another option is just to go to the root of your application and just open one instance of Visual Studio that serves both of them. Come to the root. Normally, when you have multiple projects that belong to your same solution, you create something called a solution file. Now, a solution file is not something that you can create only in Visual Studio 2019. You can create a solution file from this .NET command utility. So let's do that. Let us create a new solution file. So I can go .NET new, and I can use the switch SLN for solution file. Now that I have a solution file, I can add these two projects that I have to the solution file. We can add these other projects to the solution file using the following command. We can go .NET SLN and then the name of the solution file, which is the health solution file, and we're going to say add health API slash health API .csproj. So I'm saying add this project to that solution. Let's do the same thing for the CORS client app. So now we have 2 projects in our solution. Let me open up both of these projects in Visual Studio Code. So going back to our CORS client, let's find out where that hello world came from. The hello world came from by simply spitting out a static text called hello world. This is not very useful to us. We want to consume our service using a simple HTML page. Typically, static pages are put in a folder called www root. So we need to create a folder here under CORS client, which I'm going to call www root. And in this folder, I'm going to create a new file, and it is going to be a plain old HTML page. So I'm going to create a file called index.html. And let me just add some simple markup like h1 markup here and say hello. Now my server is not running, so let me run my server, but I need to go into the CORS client folder. But I had mentioned earlier on that I want my CORS client to listen on port 6000 and 6001. Where do we do that change? Well, the change can be done in a file called launch settings under properties. Over here, under CORS client down here, we're going to change these port numbers to 6001 and 6000, so they don't conflict with our server application. So now let me start my CORS client application. You can see here that these apps are listening on ports 6000 and 6001. So if I want to access this client app, I need to go to localhost :6001. I get my hello world, but then suppose I want to get my index.html here. I won't be able to get that. The reason I can't get that is because this empty website doesn't know how to handle static pages. You need to tell it to handle static pages, otherwise it won't do it by default. So how do I fix that? I can come to the startup.cs page. I'll comment out all the stuff here that is not useful to me. Above this code, I'm going to say app.use static files. And this tells it to be able to consume static files. Without this, you can't consume CSS, you cannot consume images, you cannot consume HTML pages. Let's see if this fixes that. And there we go. Microsoft created a utility that they call libman. Libman can be used to download client-side frameworks. Now you should use NuGet to download packages, and you should use libman to download client-side frameworks like jQuery, like Bootstrap, and that sort of thing. So if you haven't done so already, you need to install this tool. After installing this utility, we can actually execute this command. And what this command is going to do is it's going to install for us jQuery version 3.2.1, and the content delivery network is going to be this CDNJS, and we want the destination of this framework to be in our www root folder, scripts, and jQuery. And the specific file that we want downloaded is jQuery min.js. So I'm going to take this, stop my web app and run that right in my course client folders. What happened is, if you go under course client, under www root, now you have a scripts folder and you have your jQuery min.js. Let's go into our index.html page, and I'm going to replace this with a proper HTML page that's going to consume my API service, specifically my patient service. So this is what my page looks like. We're going to use the jQuery file that we just downloaded, and this is a very simple jQuery application. Notice here that we have a button that has ID button get patients, and we have a section here, a pre-RE section with an ID pre-output. This is the entry point for our jQuery. It's got a method called getPatients that points to our web API service application. Now, when the button getPatients is clicked, this method gets called, getPatients, which makes a request to the URL, and after you get a connection, it will always call this function called show response, and it will pass it whatever the response is. So what this show response does is it injects in this section pre-output, it injects the result coming from the request, and it converts the JSON into a string. So now that we have this, we need to have the server running, otherwise this example will not work. We know that our server app is in this health API folder. So I'm going to start that. Now that our server app has started, let's start our client app. So I'm going to come into the client folder, go into command prompt here, and start my client app. Let me now make a request to my client app. So if I refresh this page, which points to my client app, we can see that index.html page, it is being engaged. Let me click on get patients. It doesn't seem to work. If you're troubleshooting a JavaScript application, the place you should go to is F12 to find out what the problem is. So I'm going to hit F12 in my Chrome browser, and sure enough, you get this error. And this error has to do with something called CORS, hence the name I gave to my client application. CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing, and it has to do with the security model that if you're requesting a page from server A, and the application on server A tries to make a request to another server B, it doesn't allow it. And the server B has to allow for cross-origin resource sharing. We need to do something in our server application. So I'm going to come here, and in my server application, I need to do something. And that something is going to your startup.cs. In your configure services method, need to create a course policy. In this case, I'm calling it the health policy. And that policy says that you're going to allow any origin, meaning a request coming from any IP address, any method, meaning coming from a GET request, a POST request, a PUT request. You can actually specify this. But to make matters easy, I'm just saying allow all. And allow any header. Again, you can specify or you can restrict requests coming from specific header types. That's one thing you need to do. The other thing is you need to add another command inside of the configure method, app.use course. So here you're indicating that yes, we shall indeed use course. This is an intent. What you have here is an intent, and this is the actual using of that service. We're not done yet. We specified here a name for our policy. So where you want to implement that policy, you have to specifically indicate that. So let's go to the patient's controller, because that's the controller that we're trying to access. And at the patient's controller level, you can say enable course and put the name of your policy here. So we're going to use this health policy. I'm going to copy it and paste it here. And this needs to be resolved. Now that we've done this, we should see whether this has fixed the problem or not. So I shall first of all refresh my server application, which is localhost 5001 API patients. And my server app is working. Now let me refresh my client app, click on patients, and there you go, you get your data. So you got around that problem. Let us test the other functionalities, which is like the post, the put, and the delete. A very useful utility for that sort of thing is a free downloadable application called Postman. I have Postman installed here. I'm going to start it. Now in Postman, I'm going to make a request to my server side API service, which is https localhost 5001/API/patients. And we're going to use the get method. Notice here that in Postman, you have a lot of different kinds of verbs. Let me make a request. So this is the address that I should be going against. And there you go, we're getting our data. Let me insert a record. So I'm going to change the verb to post, and I'm going to choose body, row, and it's important over here to select JSON. So just a reminder, choose body, row, and select type JSON. And here I'm going to just create a JSON object name. The value for name is Joe Fox. So I'm adding just the name Joe Fox. I don't need to enter the patient ID because that is auto-generated. And I don't need to enter ailments because it's not mandatory at this stage. So let us click on send. When you click on send and you get a response of 201, that is good news. Anything that's in 200 range is good news. Everything that's in 400 range is bad news on the client side. Anything that's 500 range is bad news on the server side. So you can see that this has been added. Let's go and make a request, a GET request for all our patients. And you can see down here that indeed Joe Fox has been added. Let's say I want to update Joe Fox. So I can take this, copy it, and then come to the top, change my verb to put, because put is for updating. Come here, paste this, and I can change Joe Fox to Joe, let's say White. Now, when I do that, I have to add the ID, which is 4, to the top here. Why? Because I showed you earlier on that the post method in the controller expects an argument. So let us see if this is going to work. it returns a 204, and you can see 204, no content means that nothing has come back. If you go back into your action method in the controller, you will see that nothing is being returned. So that's fine. As long as it's 200, it's fine. Finally, we want to delete this. And delete is very easy because you don't need to pass a JSON object. You just need to use the delete verb and point it to a patient ID, and it will blow it away. So let's go to delete and click on send. We get an OK. Now let us make a request to all the patients using the get method, and we will find out that Joe White is gone. Thank you very much for coming this far in my video, and I hope to see you again soon.